This session at the fourth Gobeshona Global Conference. And today our session is on enabling climate finance accountability for driving locally led actions. Today's session will mainly discuss how locally led adaptation can be harnessed to enhance accountability and engage the most vulnerable voices in decision making. At the same time, this session will definitely discuss some potential and feasible ways to enhance accountability between climate actors for delivering a locally led adaptation that benefits both communities who are at the front line of crisis, but also enhances their ownership. Today, I have with me inspiring practitioners from all over the world who are working towards unfolding the um, concept of accountability and its relevance in locally led adaptation. Without much further ado, I will start today's session. Initially, I will introduce all the speakers. So we have with us, on behalf of May, Tazin Ayung. Today, Roji Joshi is representing from International Institute for Environment and Development. However, I will give a brief introduction of May because she have actually sent us a pre-recorded presentation where she really hones on what accountability means for locally led adaptation. So just a little bit of introduction. May is a researcher at IIED. Her work mainly focuses on designing and delivering climate finance to least developed countries at different levels of governance. She's interested in promoting equitable access to climate finance and supporting community empowerment through climate action. I also have with me on live Roji Joshi, who's a researcher at IIED. Rosie's work focuses on promoting locally led adaptation and devolving climate finance to the local communities, especially in least developed countries. She's interested in promoting local innovation, making local adaptation more accountable, and diversifying sources of finance for climate action. I also have with me Henry Quiroz Vilota, who's a monitoring and evaluation specialist, CPF at FFLA. Henry's work mainly revolves around monitoring and evaluation, development programs and projects with an emphasis on natural resource management. Last but not the least, I have with us Victoria Matushevich, and her work mainly focuses on climate finance, and she's the program coordinator at Foundation Avina, and she normally is and leads the BASE initiative. She leads the BASE initiative, and that mainly promotes, I would say, more and better access to climate finance for local communities by testing alternative approaches and really moving away from traditional approaches and focusing on the lived realities that resonates with the communities. So without much further ado, let's begin our session today. This is a very enticing session. And as you know, this year's Gobeshona's theme is monitoring a locally led adaptation and also resilience. So I think this is a very, very much needed session that I have great speakers today with me. So first of all, we would like to show the pre-recorded video, which May shared with us. As she couldn't be here with us, she sent us a pre-recorded video on approaches for measuring locally led adaptation for better accountability. If we can please play the pre-recorded video.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maitlaze Ao, and welcome to our event on enabling climate finance accountability for driving locally led actions. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be at the event today to respond live to your questions, but I'm really delighted to be able to present some of our scorecards work. That IIED, my organization, the International Institute for Environment and Development, has been piloting in conjunction with ICAD, Avina, and FLA. So what I'm going to talk about is about these scorecards, which how ways of measuring the locally led adaptation principles from the perspectives of different actors in the climate finance delivery chain. So I'll explain a bit more what those terms mean later, but I'll lay out first the context in which these scorecards came about. So here we have the context of climate finance, which you probably know very well. So what is wrong with adaptation finance today? We have the issue of both quantity and quality of climate finance, both of which is quite poor. So the quantity of climate finance is poor because not enough is reaching the most climate vulnerable at the front lines of climate change. Pledges are made at international levels, but very little usually flows down to the most local level, and that needs to change. There is also the issue of the quality of climate finance, where once the money does reach the local level, it comes with lots of different conditionalities and criteria that makes it very difficult for communities who are battling climate change to actually implement climate action. So here are a couple of problems with the way the quality of climate finance. So decision making, the first is that decision making is not inclusive. So this means that the communities that are most impacted by climate change are not the decision makers in deciding where should the money go, what should the climate finance be addressing, who should be involved. Usually these decisions are made in headquarters, in far off places, and communities don't have the ability to input into these decisions. The accountability is also top down, so usually reporting by communities and even intermediaries like my organization, IED, have to go to the donor. There's no mutual sense of accountability where we hold each other to account. There's also numerous conditionalities on funding, which means that there are eligibility criteria that makes it very difficult to access finance. And once we do manage to access that finance, there's lots of requirements around how we can spend it, who we can spend it on, where we can spend it. And there's a lot of reporting, due diligence criteria that accompany that finance once it does reach into the hands of the local level communities. And in conjunction with that, there are lots of burdensome rules that comes with finance. So this is the context of climate finance, and for us, in order to understand this climate finance system a bit better, we've come up with a way of explaining the system through this chain of climate finance delivery approach, we call it. This is the system, a simple way of looking at this, where providers of finance send their money to intermediaries who further send their money to recipients to actually implement climate action. So this is a simple way of looking at the flow of finance to the local level. So within this problematic context of climate finance is how the locally led adaptation principles came around. So all of you at Gobeshona are probably very aware of what the locally led adaptation principles are and how they came about. But just as a brief overview, there are 8 locally led adaptation principles that were developed in a collaborative manner by a group of diverse organizations, from international organizations to governments to local level organizations, who defined 8 different criteria or principles of what makes locally led adaptation. And these talk about different aspects of locally led adaptation, including climate finance, that it should be more flexible, longer term, and patient to actually enable locally led action. And it also includes more structural issues like gender and social equity, that it should address structural inequality, that it should devolve decision making down to the local level. So these are different elements of the locally led adaptation principles. And using this as a framework, we developed the scorecards as a way to understand what does LLA look like in different contexts and how do we measure LLA. So this comes from a recognition that locally led adaptation looks different in different cultural, political contexts, and different social groups will have different understandings of LLA. And so it is not enough for donors and intermediaries to impose a set of indicators that they believe measures locally led adaptation. We believe that locally led adaptation will be understood in different ways by different actors in the climate delivery chain. And we use the climate finance delivery chain model because it's a way to hold actors in that climate finance system accountable to each other so that they can actually move towards better alignment with LLA and improving the climate finance architecture. So we have, with our partners, IED, ICCAD, Avena, FLA, and an organization called CAPI, we have been developing these indicators in different contexts with the climate finance delivery chain model. So the indicators are developed in different geographic, sectoral contexts with different social groups. So Avena and FLA are looking in the Latin American region, while FLA is looking at indigenous peoples groups and Afro-descendant communities. In South Asia, in Bangladesh, ICCAD is looking at how LLA-aligned projects are in South Asia and also with women's groups. So the idea for this is to build a bank of indicators. So all these indicators are being developed by different actors along the finance delivery chain in different contexts. We have a crowdsourced way of building these indicators, and they are compiled into a diverse bank of indicators, we're calling it. And the idea for us is to build them in a bank and make them publicly available for everybody to use and provide feedback on. So for example, if donors working in South Asia want to look at indicators relevant to LLA in the water sector, the idea of this bank of indicators is that it could be filtered for the user to find something appropriate for them to understand LLA better within their context. And we are using these indicators to move towards more mutual accountability. So within this finance delivery chain, through the use of these indicators, there will be a fuller understanding of the impact of the projects on locally led adaptation. And the idea is that the perspectives of each of the actors in the finance delivery chain will be shared amongst all these actors in the finance delivery chain to improve the way that climate finance is done and to enable more locally led adaptation. And what is next for this line of work? So we really want to scale up these pilots. We want to be able to develop indicators in multiple different cultural contexts, geographic and political contexts. So we are inviting all of you attending Gobeshona to join us in developing indicators that are unique to your own context. After that, we'd like to compile the indicators and check that they make sense and validate them in regional focus groups and workshops to check that they actually make sense within the local context. in a system of accountability, we're also trying to understand what a system of accountability that is actually bottom up and more mutual would look like. And we want to reference local mechanisms of accountability that work. So if you have any good examples of local accountability, we would love to know. And lastly, we want to develop this interactive platform for sharing all these indicators and get feedback and have learning around what works, what doesn't, whether they make sense, whether they need more complexity. Um, so that's it. I hope that you have a wonderful event, and I look forward to hearing about it. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.
Thank you so much, May, and I hope Rosie also passes all the reactions that we're getting from the panelists, and also the participants. And thank you so much, May, for this wonderful video and for actually making us understand what accountability really means when it comes to locally led adaptation and its context when we say about climate finance. And as May was explaining, that through this accountability stream of work, we actually want to see and unfold the concept of mutual accountability, what it means, and what accountability means when it comes to delivering climate finance to the very lowest level, when money flows from the donors to intermediaries to local communities. Like, how can it be done in a transparent manner? How can we better involve the local communities in decision making and hold each other accountable with the usage of money, with using the money when any risks occur, so that the communities are supported and protected, without any question. um, and as May mentioned, that we have been working with IIED for the last 8 to 9 months to really see how we can develop contextualized scorecards that would be valid for Bangladesh's context. And just like ECAD, other organizations from Latin America and other organizations from Southeast Asia are also working with IIED to co-develop some sets of indicators, which we are calling scorecards, and which were actually co-developed with IID and also the organizations, keeping in mind the 8 principles of locally led adaptation. And what we saw in our pilot cases, and we are still doing the data analysis, we saw that this can be used as a tool to really evaluate how well local communities are involved in decision making when it comes to adaptation intervention. So the whole scorecard approach actually makes the sharing of information about adaptation more easier, open, and comfortable when we want to involve actors who are at the hierarchy. So without much further ado, now I would like to invite one of my colleagues from FLA, Henry, for his presentation, where he will share, his experience from Latin America and how they are developing tools or scorecards to really assess how well adaptation projects are meeting the needs of local community. If we can have Henry's presentation up on the screen, please.
Buen día, mucho gusto con todos. Para mí agradecer esta oportunidad de compartir esta experiencia. Lo que les voy a hablar en los próximos minutos. Ok. Voy a hablarles, he preparado esta presentación en 3 partes. Una es antecedentes y alcances, luego el proceso que desarrollamos, los hallazgos, aprendizajes y recomendaciones. En antecedentes y alcances, comentarles que el programa Alianza Clima y Desarrollo CDKN de la Fundación Futuro Latinoamericano, tenemos una relación de trabajo con el Instituto de Desarrollo para el Ambiente para identificar el nivel de adopción de los 8 principios de adaptación liderada localmente en un caso piloto. El piloto fue el proyecto de construcción de capacidades adaptativas a través de acciones de seguridad alimentaria y nutricional y construcción de paz en comunidades afro e indígenas vulnerables en la zona fronteriza entre Ecuador y Colombia. En este proceso lo que hicimos es contactarnos con 74 personas del Programa Mundial de Alimentos, del Ministerio del Ambiente, Agua y Transición Ecológica, del Gobierno Provincial de Imbabura, que son las entidades competentes, la Federación de Centros Agua y la Comarca Afroecuatoriana, como socios locales y el Centro Comunidad La Guana. La siguiente, por favor. El proceso desarrollado, iniciamos con una adaptación en base a los principios que nos mencionaron anteriormente. Diseñamos una herramienta para levantar la información. Luego tuvimos un proceso de análisis con el equipo y terminamos con la redacción de un reporte. La siguiente, por favor. Voy a desarrollar cada uno de estos casos. Aquí podemos ver un ejemplo donde están los principios en su esquema original y cómo adaptamos, incluyendo algunos aspectos que creemos relevantes y que se necesitan levantar en campo ya con las comunidades y con el grupo. Aquí incluimos una serie de preguntas orientadoras que permitan determinar el cumplimiento o la adopción de cada uno de los principios. La siguiente, por favor. La herramienta, lo que diseñamos es una hoja de cálculo, como ustedes pueden ver, donde incluimos 35 preguntas en 5 secciones. Las fases del proyecto, tanto lo que viene con el diseño, la implementación, el monitoreo y la evaluación, el tema de la consideración de vulnerabilidades e inequidades, y si se están abordando, qué espacios colaborativos se tiene, y para ello generamos listas desplegables con rangos y criterios de calificación, tipo lista de chequeo, como pueden ver en el gráfico, donde tenemos respuestas como sí, no, parcialmente, no se conoce, bien, regular, porcentajes, y diseñamos un esquema de cálculo considerando sumas condicionales según los rangos y criterios seleccionados, teniendo un modelo que tiene el ideal donde se contrasta en según las respuestas que nos dan. La siguiente, por favor. Eh, Aquí podemos ver, nos contactamos con el Programa Mundial de Alimentos, con la coordinación, y ellos nos refirieron a los colegas, al representante dentro del Comité Nacional, del Ministerio del Ambiente, Agua, Transición Ecológica y del Gobierno Provincial de Imbabura, con quienes tuvimos entrevistas, y luego con la FECAE, con la Federación de Centros Agua, la Confederación, la Comarca Afroecuatoriana del Norte de Esmeraldas, tuvimos las reuniones, y finalmente fuimos a La Guaña, la comunidad La Guaña, donde tuvimos una reunión con la comunidad y levantamos la información. La siguiente, por favor. Ya. ¿Cómo utilizamos la herramienta? Como ustedes pueden ver aquí en el ejemplo, abordamos cada una de las secciones, tenemos las preguntas orientadoras y tenemos, en este caso, las vulnerabilidades identificadas, a quién afecta, cómo fue el método de identificación, si fueron procesos participativos de consultas, etcétera, en qué medida el proyecto aborda estas vulnerabilidades y también qué porcentaje de fondos cuenta el proyecto que se destina a estas vulnerabilidades. Entonces, en estas reuniones vamos chequeando y registrando las respuestas de los participantes o de los grupos. En el caso de los grupos focales, lo que registramos es el producto y el acuerdo del análisis. La siguiente, por favor. Aquí tenemos un ejemplo, como ustedes pueden ver, iniciamos revisando desde las fases del proyecto. En el diseño, qué proceso se desarrolló. Tenemos los desplegables, si son procesos participativos, hay consultas o no hay la participación de actores vulnerables. En este caso es súper clave. A nivel de comunidad, lo que hemos hecho la consulta es respecto a cómo fue el proceso de diseño de la meta, porque el proyecto ya estaba diseñado. Igual, cómo fue el proceso de participación. Y tenemos preguntas, como ustedes pueden ver, el destino de los fondos, qué porcentaje se destina para abordar las vulnerabilidades, cuánto se destina para temas de igualdad de género, si las comunidades, las personas se sienten seguros de dar retroalimentación y poder criticar al proyecto, si la retroalimentación es tomada en cuenta, si se ha cambiado o hubo un adecuado reenfoque del proyecto, y si existen mecanismos de queja o reparación conocidos y accesibles. Aquí es importante indicar que en el caso de la comunidad, hemos hecho estas consultas y obviamente identificando los procesos que ellos tienen y cómo han ido articulándose en la implementación. Pues registramos estas preguntas y los comentarios y observaciones realizadas. La siguiente, por favor. En el proceso de análisis, lo que hemos hecho es una revisión individual y en equipo, donde hemos contrastado las calificaciones dentro de lo ideal y cuánto ha respondido cada uno de los actores, pudiendo identificar variación o entre cada uno de ellos, ¿no es cierto? Luego revisamos lo que funcionó durante el proceso, tanto de ver cómo identificamos a los actores, cómo organizamos los talleres, etcétera. Y en base a ello, identificamos los resultados, aprendizajes y recomendaciones que podemos ver en la siguiente, por favor. Finalmente, hicimos la redacción de un documento, como ustedes pueden ver acá, donde tenemos recopilados los hallazgos, recomendaciones y aprendizajes que los vamos a ir abordando en la siguiente lámina. La siguiente, por favor. Entre los hallazgos, lo que hemos encontrado es que las percepciones o calificaciones entre actores son variables, ¿no? Encontrándose que las comunidades asignan una menor calificación al promedio a los ejecutores y a los socios locales. Las comunidades dieron una menor calificación para el tema de financiamiento. Realmente el financiamiento, como ya se mencionó, no es suficiente para las expectativas y las necesidades que existen. Y adicionalmente, la acción colaborativa e inversión también tuvo una menor calificación. Esto debido a que hay muchas organizaciones que están, pero realmente son pocas las que llegan a la comunidad, ¿no? Y esto obedece también a temas como hay organizaciones, por ejemplo, de gestión de riesgo que solo se activan en ciertos momentos, ¿no? Y esto fue interesante comentarlo también a la comunidad. ¿Cuál es el beneficio para las comunidades en el uso de esta herramienta? Fue reconocer y contrastar las actividades que desarrollan y su nivel de participación en el proceso de identificación, diseño, implementación, seguimiento y evaluación de las medidas de adaptación. Los desafíos que encontramos fue superar la idea de que la participación o este proceso les afecte a futuros financiamientos. Existe ese temor en las comunidades. El otro fue lograr el tiempo requerido para realizar el ejercicio. Necesitamos entre 2 a 4 horas para correr toda esta herramienta y también lograr la participación de todos los niveles para tener una visión completa de la integración de los principios desde cada una de las visiones. La siguiente, por favor. En aprendizajes es interesante recalcar el aplicar estas herramientas que básicamente son de autorreflexión, con información cuantitativa y cualitativa, y con la participación desde las diversas miradas de los actores, revisando el ciclo del proyecto, ¿no? Desde el diseño, el monitoreo, la evaluación, Esto nos ayuda a identificar y complementar las visiones y acciones que permitan promover la adopción de estos principios de adaptación al cambio climático en el nivel local. Una parte interesante también es que debemos realizar una gestión adaptativa durante todo el ciclo del proyecto que nos permita tener la flexibilidad para hacer los ajustes que sean necesarios. Por otro lado, es necesario comprender y confiar en los actores locales, considerando las capacidades y asumiendo los riesgos conjuntamente para implementar los proyectos y lograr así la incorporación de los 8 principios. Como se mencionó anteriormente, el beneficio para las comunidades es realmente ver su participación en todos los pasos de identificación, diseño, implementación, seguimiento y evaluación. Es interesante mencionar que si hacemos una valoración del nivel de esfuerzo, muchas veces las comunidades asignan mayores recursos en temas de tiempo a las acciones que se implementan. Ahora, esto contribuye a procesos de gestión social existentes y a la auditoría y en la rendición de cuentas. Finalmente, las comunidades y organizaciones tienen sus propios procesos de gobernanza y gestión. Entonces, es clave nosotros apegarnos y respetar y ajustarnos a los procesos de gobernanza para realizar cualquier intervención. En nuestro caso fue necesario, como mencioné al inicio, hacer un acercamiento y luego en el caso de las federaciones, tener el permiso para el ingreso a las comunidades y obviamente hacer toda la coordinación. La siguiente, por favor. ¿Cuáles son nuestras recomendaciones? La idea y la parte clave es que esta herramienta u otro tipo de proceso que desarrollemos para evaluar la adopción de los principios de adaptación local deben ser incorporados a procesos de evaluación intermedia y final u otros procesos que se tengan, considerando la participación de todos los niveles. Esta no debería ser una actividad adicional y separada porque requiere esfuerzo, tiempo, dinero y puede crear confusión, además de, como mencioné, ocupa tiempo de la comunidad. El esquema de valoración siempre debe complementarse con datos cualitativos para tener una comprensión más profunda de lo que realmente está sucediendo en el proyecto y cómo éste se ajusta a la realidad. Finalmente, es necesario conocer si los proyectos realizaron un análisis previo de vulnerabilidad y género, equidad e inclusión social antes de su diseño, pues esto es la base para que un proyecto responda a las desigualdades estructurales y vulnerabilidades de actores locales diversos. Es decir, si consideramos esto en el diseño, lo vamos a ir implementando, obviamente aseguramos que se logra la implementación. Esto es de mi parte. Yo quiero agradecerles por su atención. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was a very brilliant presentation. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. I think it's so valid for all the community of practitioners who have joined us today online to really learn ways in which we can tailor these scorecards or these tools. And what you have mentioned, like there were 35 questions, and you tailored them according to your needs, and you really made sure that the participation of communities is included and is the most important thing while using this tool. And as you have mentioned that this tool can be used to identify vulnerabilities, and based on that the analysis can be done. But I really liked how you mentioned that in your recommendation part, that governance and management process, all of these should take into account using these scorecards. And I really liked how you also mentioned that adaptive management should be a big part, or a longer term thinking of using this tool. And I think it's also very important what you mentioned is this tool can act as a self-evaluation to see if how well our organization is including local communities or keeping them at decision making or at planning processes. So really, thank you so much for sharing your presentation, and I hope the audience will have some questions for you till we move with Victoria. Because after Victoria, we will have a question and answer session. So I encourage all the panelists, all the participants, and also panelists, if you have any questions for your colleagues, to really share it with us in our Q&A box and also in the chat, however you feel comfortable. Without much further ado, now I would like to invite Victoria. She's the programmatic coordinator at Foundation Avina, and also the head of secretary of BASE, to really discuss her experience in reframing, the whole questions when it comes to this scorecard exercise, and also her experience with grantees in Costa Rica and Indonesia. So really talk from her experience, and share her own experience of scorecards journey. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you so much, Afsara. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me, representing Fundación Avina, to be part of the Gobeshona conference for our first time. Hopefully, this is only the beginning of us being part of this amazing conference that you are gathering. So thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. So good day wherever you are hearing us and seeing us today. I'm based in Argentina, so it's like 10:30 in the morning for me. I know that in Bangladesh is pretty late, so thank you for an extra thanks for being here with us late on a Sunday evening. I think if you're here, it's because this matter is of great interest to you. So hopefully what I have to share brings insights and questions for us to keep reflecting on. So let me start by sharing a little bit of context on how we, as Avina and BASE, started getting closer to the LLA principles and the 360 accountability scorecards. So basically, we understood more about this work that IIT has been promoting through an informal conversation at the latest CBA. And it was something really interesting for us to understand, because at BASE, which is the initiative that I coordinate, BASE is the short for Building Approaches to Fund Local Solutions with Climate Evidence, a really big name. But basically what we aim to do at this initiative is to develop and test alternative ways of developing the climate rationale of projects in a way that is more simple, more quick, and more meaningful for communities, because we understand that communities face many barriers in trying to access big climate funds. And one of those barriers is providing the justification of why their project is effectively a climate project. So that is why we wanted to try to also understand which other types of indicators we should be looking at when we try to understand how adaptation is measured, apart from number of beneficiaries. That for us, it's an indicator that doesn't tell us that much of how the community was really not much about the activities that communities were engaged, and also what was really how the communities felt after the project was implemented. So looking for new ways of understanding how the project was implemented, how is the community engaged in this whole process, we came into understanding more about the 360 accountability scorecards, and we're really eager in testing some of these ideas into BASE's projects. So BASE is currently now implementing their first track of grants. So we are now supporting 8 projects in the global south. We have projects in Indonesia, in Cameroon, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Ghana, Ecuador, Brazil, and Costa Rica. They are mainly focused on tropical forest management. And so we decided to select 3 of the 8 projects to pilot the scorecards. This is a bit of a context on why we made these first steps. So after that, one of the things that we did is, as the way we work in Avina in really collaborative process, although Avina is the organization that coordinates the BASE initiative, there are many other partners and aligned initiatives, and we wanted to include all the voices of the experienced people at the BASE initiative as well. So we talked with other fellow organizations that were even like working closer to the communities of the projects in Indonesia and in Costa Rica to work with us in this process. So the first thing that we did is understanding this finance delivery chain in 3 main actors. Like we have the organization, the philanthropic organization that funds the BASE initiative. We have the intermediary, that in this case is Fundación Avina, and then we have the grantees that are the 3 projects that we are supporting. So when we saw and went over the questions that were included in the scorecards, we understood that it was not like the best approach, at least in our view, to ask the same questions to these 3 big actors in the finance delivery chain. So our first intervention was take each of the principles, make a really extensive review and understanding of the questions, and reframe those questions according to the actor that we were going to ask those questions. So for instance, one of the main things that we understood is that these questions were formulated in a way that the respondents should respond in a yes/no format, or high, medium, low, to at some point score each of the questions. But for the grantees, we really had the feeling and in our understanding that questions should be like more open for them to respond in a more qualitative way and not stringent in a yes, no, or high, medium, low. So that was one of the main interventions that we made, having like different approaches to ask the questions according to each of the actors of the chain, and offering especially more flexibility for grantees to answer the question more openly in a qualitative way. Well, so after we've done that, there was a joint work, as I was referring before, with 2 of BASE's partners, an organization that is supporting BASE's work as well, because at some point, what is perhaps different from other experiences that FLA, ICAR, and other organizations that are piloting these scorecards is that Avina is part of the chain. So we had to make sure that somebody else, like a third party, will ask the questions to us, because in order for us not to ask ourselves the questions and evaluate ourselves. So we found a partner who would take that role, and we asked the question also to our funder. So that is in a nutshell the process that we went through. And then I want to share some ideas or some reflections, initial reflections on how was our experience in asking those questions. So our colleague from HIVOS, that is closer to the 2 projects that we are implementing in Indonesia, went to the 2 communities to ask the questions. Another colleague of mine from Forest Trends and I went to Costa Rica to interview our project there. And it was really interesting also to find for ourselves that although we have made like an extensive review of the questions to make sure they were easy for communities and for us to ask, we had to make sure that we had a lot of flexibility when asking the questions, because we found out that interviews got like really long, and interviewees at some point got a bit bored, or they didn't understand the way we thought some of the questions. So some of the internal reflections that we made afterwards was that it's really important to make sure that when you get to start making the interviews, and that is something that is really in the core of Avina's work, to like in working of how to address those power imbalances that we see, is that when getting to the communities, instead of being there just an interviewee to avoid this way of being like extractivism of information, make sure that you share with the communities why you're doing what you're doing. It's really important for all of the people there to understand the value of the work and make sure that they can also find something in return, not only being the ones who provide the information, but at some point have the chance to ask questions to understand why this exercise can be of potential interest for them. How can they benefit from understanding, in, for instance, the case of Costa Rica, new terms as locally led adaptation, that they have never heard that before, although that is something that they are doing, but they're in their own words, right? And the same happened with Indonesia as well. They have never heard about locally led adaptation principles or locally led adaptation, but after talking with them, we understood that they were doing similar work, but without naming it with that like hashtag, let's say. So that was really important for us. Also, like after the first or the second interview, we understood that if we like had like this like stringent way of taking, let's say, LLA1 and asking all the questions for LLA1, then moving on to LLA2 and repeat the exercise, got a little bit, let's say, in a way, a little bit boring for the interviewee, and also a little bit like not really fluid, let's say. So another important finding for us is that to make sure that the person that is behind the interview knows the questions really well in order to go from one LLA to another one, because at some point, questions, for instance, in LLA1 relate to questions in LLA3. So instead of going through the questions in each LLA separately, have the flexibility to talk about one subject and asking questions that relate within each other, that are from different principles, but at the same time, tell us information that we need for us to better understand, but in a more flexible way. Another thing that we discovered is that it's also important to acknowledge that even within minority groups and marginalized groups, there are like marginalized within the marginalized. That is one specificity in one of the Indonesian projects, for instance, where the project is targeting an indigenous community, and within the indigenous community that is a marginalized group, women and youth are marginalized within that group. So it is important to identify in each community to make sure that we capture the comments, the ideas, and the reflections of everybody that has been engaged in the process, either in the formulating of the project, in the implementation, or afterwards in the MEL monitoring and evaluation and learning after the project is implemented. And perhaps another idea to share before I end my intervention here is that we found a lot of value, especially in the Costa Rica experience, that the interviewees, we were two people in making the interviews. So it was really an enriching process for us to complement between the two of us, while one was asking the questions, perhaps the other could offer like an example to make sure that the question was really like understood for the community, from the community. And if you are there recording and also taking notes, it's important that the person that is being interviewed can talk to you, and you are like free of taking notes, and the other one is taking care of that. Like you are paying attention to the person that is sharing whatever he or she wants to share with you, and you give your full attention, and your partner is like taking care of more like the more administrative and more like formal things to capture from the interview. I think I'm going to stop there in order to not to take that much time, but happy to share more afterwards. Thank you so much, Afsara.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think those were great interventions. You got a lot of appreciations and reactions, still getting it from the audience and panelists. So thank you so much. Couple of things I really want to reflect on is that, you know, how you mentioned about that partnership of interviewers, especially while communicating with interviewees, um, especially when talking to local communities, so that you're making that eye contact when asking these questions and making sure that, you know, your colleague or whoever is helping you is really also taking notes, and that way it can be more done in a transparent manner where you have captured all the information. I really liked how you mentioned, you know, about um, contextualizing these scorecards into versions where it makes more sense to your context. Or, for example, in your case, like since you're an intermediary, it was very important for you to keep in mind what your grantees think of it. You know, how will they pursue this tool? And I really liked how you mentioned that, you know, you had the opportunity to reframe these questions or these scorecards for philanthropists, intermediaries, and grantees yourself. And also, you know, how you mentioned that you had someone who also asked you the questions, and also so I think that's a very important thing, and that's when you also get to self-evaluate yourself. And one of the things that also I think is worth highlighting from your intervention is that you mentioned the word flexibility, and I think that's so important because I think in many cases when we talk about devolving climate finance or to the lowest level, one of the key thing is like, you know, how do we make sure the finance that is reaching to the local level is can be monitored or evaluated to such a level where there is also flexibility in measurement, or because I think traditionally for decades now, monitoring and evaluation has been done in such a stringent manner, and I think it's particularly now or this year is the right time where we question all these rigid structures of monitoring and evaluation and really tailor them to such a level where it makes sense and resonates with the local community's lived values. So thank you so much. I think those were some great interventions. And now I would really welcome and appreciate if we have some questions from the audience or even from any of the panelists. I also have my colleagues here, so if you have any questions to the panelists like Victoria or Henry, they will be happy to take it, or any questions from the audience is welcomed. Okay, I will let everyone take their time and ask you questions. But for let me get this ball rolling and let me start it to break the ice. So what I really want to ask to Henry and Victoria is that, you know, we have talked so much about the experience of using the scorecards. So where do you see this going next? You know, how can we utilize it to such a level where you know this can be a norm, and what is your future vision with the scorecards or the indicators that you have at the moment?
Perhaps I
Henry,
can start.
sure, Victoria.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Sarah, for that great question. Um, uh, I think that there is a lot of value in the exercise of these 360 accountability scorecards, because one of the main things that I share with May when we were in the process of developing this exercise is that, like, the principles itself, the 8 LLI principles are of great value. And I think that all of, as she shared in her presentation, there were many organizations behind understanding which should be like the main elements that guide a well-framed and a good approach of what we understand as locally led adaptation. But at the same time, the principles itself have to be grounded at some point, because perhaps, and that is something that we discovered doing the exercise of the piloting, what grantees understand from predictable and patient funding might be different from what we as intermediaries or funders might understand, and the possibilities each of us and what is at stake for each of the stakeholders. So I think that the exercise of putting this into specific questions has a lot of value to really understand what we mean by each of these principles. And also think something that for us was really valuable was to make the exercise while our projects are being implemented, because the exercise of doing of making the questions provided us of great inputs, and we have not finalized the exercise, but we are sure that at the end we will have insights that hopefully make us give us the opportunity to change specific things in the implementation of basis grantees, to make sure that we try to address all of the 8 principles as much as possible. So doing the exercise at the time the project is being implemented is a great opportunity to improve the work that we are doing. And regarding for the future, I think that all of this experience that Pla is sharing, that you, Sarah, have also experienced, and I learned a bit of that when you share at COP, at the latest COP, I think is really valuable for us who piloted and IAD, of course, to gather once more and make sure that we can exchange what we have done and perhaps make a proposal of what should be improved from the scorecards, from what we have learned piloting this, and make sure we take this to the bigger climate finance ecosystem, because at least in our experience and the work that Avina does, we really need to find alternative ways of measuring the success. And this is really something that we need to reflect more on, and to question, what are we understanding by success? Who defines success? Is only like the business as usual indicator, like number of beneficiaries, or there's something else that we want to highlight that comes really from the beneficiaries? And that is something that when I use the word beneficiaries, I cannot avoid thinking about Salim, because he questioned the word beneficiaries a lot, and I think it's a word that we should find a way to change, because it's not really the beneficiaries, the word that we should be using. So, and I will leave it at that to hear more about what Henry has to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think that was a great answer. And I really liked how you mentioned that, we need to take these learnings to the bigger climate finance ecosystem, to the funders, to the donors, and really also allow co-production of knowledge between ourselves and the organizations who are involved in piloting this. So really looking forward to that. And now I would like to go to Henry and really hear from you.
Sí, respecto al tema, es súper interesante los procesos que se hacen, porque hacemos una parada en la ejecución. Normalmente estamos ejecutando, y generamos un proceso de reflexión con las herramientas. Es una buena oportunidad para reunirnos con la comunidad y hablar en término horizontal, ¿no? Donde, como dijo Victoria, en este espacio abrimos la oportunidad para que nos pregunten también, ¿no? Y conozcan cuál es nuestro papel en hacer esta observación. Al inicio de las presentaciones nosotros les mencionábamos que somos veedores, ¿no? Estamos viendo cómo el proceso, el proyecto aborda estos principios, ¿no? Y que buscamos tener respuestas para mejorar. Pues, esa es una buena oportunidad, como digo, y también de compartir con ellos nuestra visión, ¿no? Nosotros como Fundación Futuro Latinoamericano trabajamos en búsqueda de fortalecer el tema de la sociedad civil, ¿no? La participación. Entonces, para nosotros es súper clave tener estos espacios donde la gente pueda también preguntarnos, ¿no? Y podemos aclarar nuestro rol, el rol de los ejecutores, el rol del donante, y ver también los límites, hasta dónde se llega, ¿no? Y en la perspectiva futuro, obviamente, estas herramientas se van a ir adaptando. Es algo súper interesante ver cómo se pueden ir ajustando dependiendo de los contextos y de las realidades. Y lo interesante, creo, y el reto es lograr que estos principios sean adoptados por los donantes, ¿no? Si el donante pone esto en las condiciones, va a ser mucho más fácil que se adopten. Ahora, la clave es definir cuál es el valor agregado de implementar los principios. Eso creo que va a dar respuesta y va a ser algo que les permita a los donantes adoptarlos también, ¿no? Este es un tema que va en las dos direcciones. Y obviamente es súper interesante ver las visiones de todos, y concuerdo con Victoria, nosotros no usamos el término beneficiario porque esto implica una posición de poder. Y nosotros siempre estamos hablando de participantes, donde la persona tenga la oportunidad de criticar, de cuestionar y sobre todo de aportar. Esa es nuestra visión y nuestro compromiso acá. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Henry. I think those were great points. I really liked how you mentioned and really highlighted the point that this needs to be adapted by donors, and we also need to ask ourselves and the bigger community of practitioners who are working on climate change adaptation and climate change in general, that what is the added value of these principles. And as you mentioned, and I totally agree with Victoria and also Henry, that we really need to define what we mean by saying beneficiaries. And absolutely, I agree with you, Henry, when you said that beneficiaries, and by using this word, it also encapsulates the power relation or the power dynamic. So it's the right time to move away from this, from this rigid, I would say, indicators where we just say how many people or how many number of beneficiaries involved participating in this project or are getting benefits of these adaptation interventions. Okay, so we have another question in the chat box, and that is that, how do we ensure accountability using the matrix from the implementers end? How can implementers hold the donors accountable? Anyone who wants to go next, Henry or Victoria? I can repeat the question. I'm putting it also in the chat box so that it's easier. So how do we ensure accountability? Ensuring the matrix from the implementer's end, and also how can implementers hold the donors accountable using this metrics? Victoria?
Okay, yeah, I can start providing some ideas or some suggestions. So I think that for at least for our exercise and even how we started doing things within the BASE initiative, a critical issue when we talk about accountability is trust. So the first thing perhaps on my side to share is that these projects that we are supporting came from we had like a closed call to select the projects that we were going to support. So these projects or even the organizations that propose the projects were suggested or indicated by BASIS partners. So a previous work had been done with them, and I think that is one of the main benefits in our experience of having the chance to be more flexible, because it's somebody that you trust that has worked with somebody that you trust before. So and one of the amazing things on this process is that when you gain that trust, you can allow all the process to be more flexible even in the means when you ask for, let's say you have like an intermediate report where they need to tell you how things have been done and to provide this accountability of for the use of funds. One of the things that we are testing is how we move from actual invoices or receipts to stories, to photographs, to sharing, to store, like more to storytelling. And that is something also that can be experienced or implemented when we talk about the scorecards and what do we understand by transparency and accountability. Because, and also when we talk about these power imbalances, and that is also something that makes me think about the session that we shared with you, Afsara, last year at CBA, when we challenged funders to really ask themselves how they could reshape their role in offering new capabilities. Because at some point it's like the funders offering the resources, but also asking for their own terms to be fulfilled, where perhaps there can be and are a lot of lessons learned and ideas that need to be reviewed and come from the participants or the allies' perspectives. So perhaps what one donor thinks about what is a good accountability, that should be like, I don't know, if when you planned your Gantt chart or your activities, you said, I'm going to implement 3 workshops with 30 people each. And by the time you implement, perhaps the participant says, instead of doing 3 workshops with 30 people, I need to do, I don't know, 60 workshops, but with 5 people each, let's say. And for the funder to really have the capacity to understand that these needs might change during the implementation process, and perhaps what I was saying before related to what we understand by success. I leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I think, yes, that was great. As you mentioned that, like, how we in community-based adaptation last year, when we played those when we had those breakout rooms with the funders, I think that was so interesting. And I think those were the real questions that we should be asking, that how do we really move away from business as usual to business unusual. And as you mentioned that, using some innovative ways such as photo stories or storytelling, um, adding that lens to the scorecards can also be something different moving forward. And I think that's something both implementers and donors can also put forward in future as using these scorecards. Okay, Henry, would you like to come in now?
Sí, claro, por supuesto. ¿Y cómo podemos garantizar que haya rendición de cuenta por parte de los ejecutores? Creo que como mencioné al inicio, la parte clave es fortalecer las capacidades que hay de los sectores. En el caso nuestro, trabajamos con federaciones y con confederaciones, que son organizaciones locales de segundo y tercer grado, ¿no? Que tienen sus procesos. Normalmente hacen asambleas cada año, en las comunidades hacen reuniones bimensuales o mensuales. Entonces creo que en estos espacios es necesario incluir esta participación de los ejecutores para que hagan su rendición y comenten sobre los resultados que están logrando, ¿no? Estos procesos, en el caso de la FECAE, de la Federación Agua, ellos los mantienen, ¿no? Y es interesante ver que esto permite, además de rendir cuentas, difundir lo que se está haciendo y obviamente ustedes saben, siempre hay dificultades, ¿no? También encontrar soluciones a esas dificultades. El reto más bien es cómo llegar al donante, ¿no? Usualmente el donante está bastante lejos, ¿no es cierto? Tanto por ubicación como por la realidad que vive, que muchas veces el reto es lograr que entienda cómo son las dinámicas locales. Por ejemplo, les comento, si uno quiere ir al territorio WOW, uno tiene que informar a los líderes, pedir permiso, ellos comunican a la comunidad decide si en la reunión que van a tener pueden recibirte, entonces tienes que esperar y esa dinámica, esos ciclos de tiempo toman mucho más de lo que el donante o a veces el proyecto con toda la buena intención lo puso en el papel, ¿no es cierto? Ustedes saben que el papel aguanta todo, ese es un dicho que usamos nosotros acá. Pero claro, la realidad es otra. Entonces, creo que el reto es ese, ¿no? Cómo lograr que se adapten y no se rompan esas dinámicas locales. Entonces, ese para mí es la parte clave. El otro reto que vemos acá en Ecuador, ¿no? Tenemos toda una estructura a nivel de gobiernos locales que por ley tienen que hacer estos temas de transparencia y hacer rendición de cuentas, que justamente este es el mes en que todo el Ecuador está haciendo la rendición de cuentas en todos los sectores. Entonces el reto es cómo llegar también a esto para que toda la sociedad conozca lo que se está haciendo, porque tenemos una matriz con muchos actores, muchas cosas que se están haciendo y que en la mayoría de casos se desconocen. Creo que por ahí van las oportunidades, yo lo veo más como oportunidades de cómo llegar a que todo el mundo conozca esto y obviamente esto implica un cambio de actitudes y de prácticas, ¿no? Que en esto estamos involucrados todos, los ejecutores, y creo que especialmente el donante, cambiar sus conocimientos, sus actitudes y sus prácticas, que sean más flexibles y, como digo, que permitan generar un valor agregado. Nosotros sabemos que en todos los temas de adaptación al cambio climático, más del 80% de los recursos han estado destinados en investigaciones, en definir en qué medida estamos destrozando el mundo, ¿no? Pero quizá hay que revertir eso, ¿no? Y deberíamos cambiar los fondos hacia cómo podemos establecer medidas que permitan controlar y evitar esto. Creo que eso es lo que puedo aportar.
Thank you so much, Henry. I think those were very valuable points that you mentioned. I really liked how you mentioned that this can be a tool to also strengthen our own capabilities, and also to see that, you know, what is going wrong at the moment and how can we better ourselves. And as you mentioned that, you know, this scorecards gives us a whole spreadsheet to also see the results, and allows us to discuss the challenges. And as you mentioned that sometimes the reality is hard, you know, sometimes in our own context, in our own political level, it might be hard to also reach the donors, depending on the geography we are in. And sometimes, as you mentioned that, you know, you guys, you are a federation, and sometimes there are the hard realities that you need to inform the leaders, and then the communities also, you know, needs to be on the same board of who are they having as guests. So, you know, we also need to keep in mind those dynamics, those cultural things, those social norms, that also exist. But as you mentioned, I totally agree that reality is different, and sometimes we also need to look at local government, who are one of the main entities of making sure locally led happens in a very transparent and accountable manner. So how do we do this in a very whole of society approach? And at the end, what you mentioned, I think, is so valuable, that, you know, we also need to make sure that our attitudes and practices are flexible, especially when we speak in a donor's viewpoint. And how can we redirect more funds, as you mentioned, to really justify this? So thank you so much. Great interventions from both Victoria and Henry. Really a pleasure to have you today with us. So thank you so much for your presentations, and also for taking part, Victoria, in such a good discussion, both of you. Now I would like to welcome Roji Joshi from IIED to reflect on, you know, the presentations and the discussions that we just had with Victoria and Henry. So over to you, Roji. Thank you.
Thank you, Afsara. Thank you, everyone, Victoria, Henry, and me, and thank you all the attendees for listening to this whole conversation on accountability. So just trying to reflect back on what we discussed over this last hour on accountability. So we're talking about the locally led adaptation and how different actors along the finance delivery chain have different roles to play in ensuring the locally led adaptation and making it more efficient and effective. So as we saw from this presentations from our speakers, we've seen the issue is around usually the existing problem is around the current finance delivery chain, which involves the providers, recipients, and intermediaries, does not actually empower the local communities, and they're often left out from decision making. So in order to break this problem, we did some testing around the scorecards, and Avina, and we heard from Avina and Fla. So from the lessons, from what they have done, we understood that it is very crucial that we are more adaptive and flexible when we are working with the communities, when we are trying to get feedback from the communities, and make it more participatory as well, and also consider the different context of the reason of the social context, and consider the intersectionality where there are marginalized groups within the marginalized communities. So intersectionality is one of the things at the community level, and also when we are looking at the intermediaries and the providers, it might be often tricky to involve with them. So we need to frame the question around that. So to sum up, I think the scorecards should be more adaptive and flexible in all contexts, and each principle would mean different in different contexts. It would be different for each actor. It would be different for the local communities. It would be different for the intermediaries, and it will mean different for the donors. So I think the scorecards has opened the avenue to look at the principle in different angles. So it does not mean the same for everyone. So going forward, I think it will open up more honest and open conversation between all the actors of the finance delivery chain. And so, as our speakers mentioned earlier, so I think going forward we need to look into the bigger financial ecosystems, where we are looking into the donors, the large donors, the large players in the donors, the large players in the intermediaries, and the larger communities, and accordingly design the bank of indicators. So as we saw in May's presentation, IIT is working on developing bank of indicators. So the pilots from FLA, ECADS, Avena are just few examples of how we are developing the bank of indicators, but we would obviously like to hear from other partners, other actors involved in locally led adaptation to further shape the bank of indicators that we are developing to make it more realistic and more practical in coming days. And yes, so we are developing a bank of indicators platform, which we hopefully would trying to launch by the end of 2024, hopefully. And by then we can have some feedback from others as well. But in the meantime, if there are any feedback or if you'd like to engage with us in the scorecards and indicators work, that will please reach out to us. And yes, having said that, I think this approach, which involves a more feedback model, challenges current accountability dynamics, where recipients are more accountable upwards to intermediaries and providers. For example, recipients felt that recipients are often required to provide the information around the finance spent to the providers and the intermediaries. So we believe that this approach will promote more of downward accountability, where providers and intermediaries are also accountable to the recipients, for example, by providing more transparent finance flows on the locally led adaptation. So this is more of a mutual work, mutual feedback, and mutual accountability, which will enable stakeholders to share their perspectives, shape improvements, and monitor progress towards locally led adaptation. It could be termed different ways by different communities, but whatever it is about empowering the local communities, devolving decision-making, devolving climate finance. So yes, through greater transparency and communication, this approach aims to build trust between the finance delivery chain actors, laying the groundwork for good partnerships and more of empowering the local communities and tackling the global climate crisis, we are facing this triple crisis of people, planet, and nature, and climate crisis. So yes, I think this is one of the ways we can help tackle these issues. So it was a great session. Thank you all. I would like to end my reflection here. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Roji. I think that was such a nice closing to the session that we had on, accountability and climate finance. And I think, I think this was a session which really paves the way forward for business unusual, and captures the main essence of what we mean by downward accountability, and also shows some, current methodologies that we are using to really assess that, how well local communities can be involved, not only in planning, design, but also implementation and monitoring. And I think, as you mentioned, that it's so important to, go forward and maintain this feedback mechanism loop, and which can be a very rewarding journey for all the community of practitioners in the climate change arena to learn from each other and also co-produce on our learnings and pave the way forward for climate finance, which really adheres to the local lived reality of the communities, so that the fund reaches to the ones who are being most impacted by the climate vulnerabilities and climatic hazards. So thank you so much to all the speakers and interpreters, and also to ECAT Gobeshona team for really facilitating these great sessions. Thank you so much to Victoria, Henry, Roji, May. I think this wouldn't be possible without your support, without your cooperation. collaboration and also without your expertise and valuable knowledge. It was my absolute pleasure to moderate this session. I'm Afsara Mirza, and I think I forgot to give my introduction at the beginning, but I work at ECAD as a research officer, and I think it was really great to moderate this session where we talked about the very hard questions, the hard realities that does exist in the climate change arena, and also a way forward to change all of this. So I would request all of you to turn on your camera so that the Gobeshona team can take a screenshot of all of us, and we can be on the website where they put all our key messages and shows our face. So I would request the interpreters and also Savio, if you can also turn on your camera. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great week, and also have a great rest of the day. Thank you, and hopefully we see each other soon again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Gracias. Chao.